That fat hippo disgusts me. I'm only interested in her fortune. I stood frozen outside the bedroom door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My husband Ethan's voice carried through the crack, casual and cruel, like he was discussing the weather. The words landed on me like stones, each one heavier than the last. You should see the way she eats, mother. It's repulsive, he continued, and I heard his mother, Sylvia, laugh. That sharp, brittle sound I'd grown to recognize over the past 3 years. My name is Savannah, and I'm 34 years old. I stood in the hallway of the home I bought with my own money in Louisville, Kentucky, listening to my husband describe me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. The marble floor felt cold beneath my bare feet, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just numb. When will you get access to everything? Sylvia asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still reached me clearly. Soon, Ethan said. I've been patient for 3 years. The prenup expires in 6 months, and then I can file for divorce and take half of everything, maybe more if I play it right. I stepped back from the door slowly, carefully, making sure the floorboard didn't creak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my hands were steady. I walked back down the hallway to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the breakfast bar. The evening sun was streaming through the windows, making everything look warm and golden, normal, like my world hadn't just shattered. The evening sun was streaming through the windows, making everything look warm and golden, normal, like my world hadn't just shattered. I'd met Ethan 4 years ago at a construction industry conference in Nashville. I owned a successful property development company that I'd built from nothing after my father died and left me a small inheritance. I'd turned $50,000 into a multi-million-dollar empire through careful investments, smart partnerships, and 16-hour workdays. Ethan had been charming, attentive, interested in everything I said. He'd swept me off my feet with romantic dinners and long conversations about our dreams. He'd proposed after 8 months, and I'd been so happy I'd cried for an hour. Now I sat in my kitchen and realized that every moment had been a performance. Every kiss, every whispered, "I love you," every time he'd held me close had been a lie. He'd been counting down the days until he could take what I'd built and walk away. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face shifting into that warm smile I'd once thought was genuine. He was handsome in an ordinary way, brown hair and blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Sylvia followed behind him, tall and thin, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She gave me the same look she always did, like I was something unfortunate she had to tolerate. "Hey, sweetheart," Ethan said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "We were just talking upstairs about maybe going out for dinner tonight. What do you think?" I looked at him and felt nothing. That was the strangest part. 3 minutes ago, I would have felt love, or at least what I thought was love. Now, there was just empty space where those feelings had been. "Actually, I'm not feeling well," I said, my voice coming out steady and calm. "You two go ahead. I think I'll just have some soup and go to bed early." Sylvia's eyes lit up with barely concealed pleasure. "Oh, what a shame. Well, we won't let your reservation go to waste. Come along, Ethan." I watched them leave, listened to the garage door close, heard Ethan's car pull away. Then I sat in the silence of my beautiful home and let myself feel it. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage that was starting to build in my chest like a fire catching hold. I'd spent 3 years cooking his favorite meals, even though he complained about my weight. I'd attended his mother's insufferable dinner parties, where she criticized everything from my clothes to my career. I'd supported his failed business ventures, written checks without complaint, believed him when he said he was working late, and all of it had been a lie. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, the same time I always did. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his face peaceful and innocent in the dawn light. I got up quietly, got dressed, and went downstairs to my home office. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started making lists. I built my business through careful planning and attention to detail. Every successful project started with a solid plan, clear objectives, and thorough research. This would be no different. If Ethan thought he could manipulate me out of everything I'd worked for, he'd seriously underestimated exactly who he'd married. The first thing I did was pull up all our financial records. I'd always managed our money because Ethan claimed he wasn't good with numbers. Now I understood that had been strategic. He'd wanted me to think he was harmless, incompetent even, while he waited for his opportunity. We had a prenuptial agreement that I'd insisted on before the wedding. My lawyer had drafted it to protect my existing assets and my business. The agreement stated that anything I'd owned before the marriage remained solely mine. However, there was a clause that I'd agreed to at Ethan's request. After 5 years of marriage, we would dissolve the prenup and convert to a standard marital property arrangement. At the time, I thought it was romantic, a sign that I trusted him. Now, I realized it was the trap he'd been setting all along. We were 3 years and 4 months into the marriage. In 8 months, everything I owned would become community property, and he could divorce me and walk away with half. I pulled up the deed to our house. I'd bought it 2 years ago for $2.4 million. It was in my name alone, protected under the prenup. My business was valued at approximately $8 million, also protected. I had investment accounts, retirement funds, and a stock portfolio that collectively totaled another $3 million. Ethan had contributed nothing. He'd worked sporadically at his brother's insurance agency, but he'd quit 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to focus on his own entrepreneurial ventures. I'd supported that decision. I'd supported everything. I sat back in my chair and looked at the numbers on the screen. $13.4 million. That was what my 3 years of fake love were worth to him. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner, Veronica. She wanted to discuss a new property development opportunity in the downtown area. I'd known Veronica for 12 years. She'd been my first major client when I was just starting out, and we'd formed a partnership 5 years ago. She was smart, ruthless in negotiations, and had never once judged me for my weight or anything else about me. I texted her back, "Can we meet today? Something important has come up." She responded immediately, "Lunch at Morrison's." Noon. I spent the next several hours going through every document, every account, every asset. I made copies of everything, saved them to an encrypted drive, and backed them up on a secure cloud server. Ethan slept until 9, then came downstairs in his pajamas, yawning and scratching his chest. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing the top of my head as he passed. "You're up early. Big day." "Just catching up on some paperwork," I said, not looking up from my screen. He poured himself coffee and sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through his phone. "I'm meeting Tyler for golf this afternoon," he said. "That okay with you?" Tyler was his younger brother, the one who employed him when he bothered to work. I'd always found Tyler vapid and slightly dishonest, but I tolerated him because family was important. Now I wondered if Tyler had been in on the whole thing, if they'd laughed about me together, the stupid fat rich woman who'd believed in love. "That's fine," I said. "I have a lunch meeting anyway." "Oh yeah? With who?" "Veronica, just business stuff." He nodded, already bored with the conversation. That was another thing I'd noticed over the years. He only paid attention when we were discussing money or when other people were watching. In private, he treated me like furniture. I told myself it was just the comfortable silence of long-term couples. Now I understood. It was contempt. I left at 11:30 and drove to Morrison's, a small restaurant near my office downtown. Veronica was already there, sitting in our usual booth in the back. She was 52 with short gray hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She stood up when she saw me and pulled me into a quick hug. "You look tense." she said as we sat down. What's going on? I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the prenup trap, the realization that my entire marriage had been a con. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each sentence. When I finished, she sat back and took a long drink of her water. That absolute bastard, she finally said. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I said, but I need to move fast. I have 8 months before the prenup expires. If he files for divorce after that, he gets half of everything. And you know how these things go. He'll claim he supported my career, that he sacrificed his own opportunities. He'll paint me as the cold businesswoman who neglected him. So you need to file first, Veronica said. Maybe, I said, but I keep thinking about what he said about being patient for 3 years, about playing it right. He's been planning this from the beginning, Veronica. The whole relationship was fake. Then make sure he gets exactly what he deserves, she said. Which is nothing. We talked through lunch, considering options and strategies. Veronica had been through a brutal divorce herself 10 years ago, and she knew every trick in the book. By the time we finished eating, I had the beginning of a plan. That evening, I acted like nothing had changed. I made dinner, a roasted chicken with vegetables that I barely touched. Ethan ate enthusiastically, telling me about his golf game and some investment opportunity Tyler had mentioned. I nodded and smiled and pretended to care. He didn't notice the difference. He never noticed anything about me. Sylvia called during dinner. Ethan put her on speaker, and I listened to her complain about her garden club drama while I cleared the plates. She didn't ask how I was doing. She never did. When Ethan finally hung up, he stretched and yawned. I think I'll watch the game, he said, and want to join me? I have some work to finish up, I said. You go ahead. I went back to my office and continued my research. I looked into offshore accounts, asset protection trusts, and property transfer laws. I consulted with 3 different lawyers through encrypted emails, not mentioning names, but explaining the situation in general terms. I needed to understand exactly what my options were and how to protect what I'd built. The truth was, I didn't want to just divorce Ethan and move on. That felt too simple, too easy for him. He'd spent 3 years lying to me, manipulating me, waiting for his payday. He'd made me doubt myself, feel ashamed of my body, question my worth. His mother had treated me like trash, and he'd encouraged it. They'd laughed at me together, called me a fat hippo, discussed my fortune like it was already theirs. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt standing in that hallway. I wanted them to understand what it meant to have everything taken away. I wanted justice, real justice, not just a divorce settlement. Over the next week, I moved carefully. I went to work every day, managed my properties, met with contractors and investors. At home, I was the same beautiful wife I'd always been. I cooked, cleaned, made conversation. Ethan suspected nothing. Why would he? In his mind, I was stupid and desperate, grateful to have him despite his obvious lack of attraction to me. But behind the scenes, I was dismantling everything. I contacted a corporate lawyer in Chicago who specialized in business restructuring. I met with my accountant and discussed reorganizing my company's financial structure. I reached out to an old colleague who now worked in international property development. Every conversation was carefully documented, every decision strategic. I also hired a private investigator. His name was Ezra, and he came highly recommended by Veronica. I gave him one job: follow Ethan and document everything. I didn't know what he'd find, but I had a feeling there was more to discover. Men who lie about one thing usually lie about everything. Ezra called me 3 days later while I was at a property inspection in the West End of Louisville. I stepped away from my foreman and took the call. You need to see this, Ezra said, his voice grim. Can you meet me? We met at a coffee shop an hour later. Ezra was in his 60s, gray-haired and professional in a way that made you trust him immediately. He slid a manila folder across the table without preamble. Inside were photographs. Ethan with a woman I didn't recognize. Ethan kissing that woman outside a hotel. Ethan entering an apartment building with her. The photos were dated and time-stamped. They went back 14 months. Her name is Kelsey, Ezra said. She's 26, works as a receptionist at a dental office. He's been seeing her since about 6 months after you bought your house. The apartment is his. He rents it under an LLC, pays cash. She doesn't know he's married. I stared at the photos and felt that strange numbness again. It should have hurt more. It should have destroyed me. Instead, I felt oddly validated. This was who he really was. This was the truth beneath the performance. There's more, Ezra said. I did some digging into his finances. He's got significant gambling debts, about $200,000 spread across 3 different casinos. He's been using cash advances from credit cards you didn't know about. Your name isn't on them, but he's been paying the minimums from the household account you give him access to. I looked up from the photos. How much has he taken? About $30,000 over the past year. Small amounts. Nothing that would trigger your attention, but it adds up. I closed the folder and sat back. Keep following him. Document everything. I want to know every lie, every debt, every secret. Can you do that? Absolutely, Ezra said. What are you planning? I'm planning to make sure he never underestimates anyone ever again, I said. That night, I lay in bed next to Ethan and watched him sleep. He looked peaceful, content, like a man without a care in the world. He had no idea that his carefully constructed plan was about to collapse. He didn't know that the stupid fat woman he'd been using was 10 steps ahead of him. He thought he was the predator, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated his prey. 2 weeks later, I sat in a conference room in downtown Chicago with 3 lawyers, my accountant, and Veronica. The view from the 42nd floor was spectacular, but I barely noticed it. I was focused on the documents spread across the mahogany table in front of me. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, looking at the lead attorney, a woman named Judith, who specialized in asset protection. If I restructure my company this way, convert my personal assets into business holdings, and establish the trust you're recommending, everything becomes untouchable in a divorce? Not entirely untouchable, Judith said carefully, but significantly more complicated to access. Your husband would have to prove that these moves were made in bad faith, specifically to defraud him in a divorce. Given that you're not filing for divorce, that you're simply restructuring your business for legitimate reasons, and that the prenup is still in effect, he'd have a very difficult case. What about the house? I asked. The house is interesting, Judith said, pulling out another document. You purchased it 2 years ago in your name alone. It's protected under your prenup. However, if you wanted to ensure there's absolutely no argument about marital property appreciation, you could sell it and reinvest the proceeds into the trust before the prenup expires. I looked at Veronica. We'd discussed this possibility, but hearing it laid out so clearly made it real. Selling the house meant leaving, making a visible move that Ethan would notice. It meant the game was truly beginning. How long would it take? I asked. In this market, with a property like yours, 2 to 3 weeks if you price it right, Judith said. We have connections with several real estate firms that specialize in quick, discreet sales. My accountant, Walter, leaned forward. He was 68 years old and had been managing my finances since I'd started my company. He'd watched me build everything from nothing, and he'd been genuinely angry when I told him what Ethan had been planning. Savannah, I've run the numbers every possible way, Walter said. What Judith is proposing is completely legal. You're reorganizing your business structure to prepare for expansion, which you've been planning anyway. The trust is a standard estate planning tool. Selling the house and relocating for business purposes is logical, given the new development opportunities downtown. None of this is unusual for someone in your position, except that it leaves Ethan with nothing, I said. It leaves him with exactly what he contributed, Walter corrected, which is nothing. I thought about the photos Ezra had given me. Ethan with Kelsey, laughing, kissing, playing house in the apartment he'd rented with money he'd stolen from me. I thought about Sylvia's cruel laughter, about being called a fat hippo, about 3 years of believing in a love that had never existed. Let's do it, I said. All of it. How soon can we start? Today, Judith said. I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. The trust can be established within a week. The business restructuring will take a bit longer, but we can start the process immediately. We spent the next 3 hours going through every detail. I signed preliminary documents, authorized Walter to begin transferring assets, and approved the business reorganization plan. By the time I left Chicago, the wheels were in motion. I drove back to Louisville feeling strangely calm. The city lights blurred past as I crossed the bridge over the Ohio River. Somewhere in that city, Ethan was probably with Kelsey, lying about working late, or maybe he was home playing the devoted husband, waiting for his payday. It didn't matter anymore. He'd already lost. He just didn't know it yet. When I got home at 9:30 that evening, Ethan was on the couch watching television. He looked up when I came in, surprised. "You're late," he said. "Where were you?" "Chicago," I said, setting down my briefcase. "Business meeting. I texted you this morning." He looked confused, checking his phone. "Oh, right. Sorry, I must have missed it. How did it go?" "Really well, actually," I said, and that was the truth. "I'm restructuring the company, expanding into some new markets. It's going to mean some changes, but good ones." "That's great, babe," he said, already turning back to the television. He didn't ask about the details. He didn't care about my business unless it affected his bank account. I went upstairs, took a long shower, and lay in bed thinking about the next steps. Ezra had continued his surveillance, and the reports kept coming. Ethan's debts were worse than we'd originally thought. He owed money not just to casinos, but to individual loan sharks. He'd borrowed from friends, from his brother, from anyone who would give him cash. He was drowning, desperately waiting for his divorce payday to bail himself out. The affair with Kelsey was serious. Ezra had recordings of Ethan promising her they'd be together soon, that he was just waiting for the right time to leave his wife. He'd told her I was cold and distant, that our marriage was over in everything but name. He'd made himself the victim, the poor man trapped with a woman he didn't love. I had been angry at first, then hurt, but now I just felt a strange kind of clarity. Ethan wasn't a person to me anymore. He was a problem to be solved, a mistake to be corrected. I'd spent 3 years trying to be enough for him, changing myself, doubting myself, accepting his mother's abuse because I thought that's what love required. I'd been so wrong. The next morning, I called a real estate agent I'd worked with before, a sharp woman named Vanessa, who handled high-end properties. I met her at a coffee shop near my office. "I need to sell my house," I said without preamble. "Fast, quiet, and at a good price." Vanessa didn't even blink. "When you say fast, what's your timeline?" 2 weeks? 3 maximum. And my husband doesn't need to know until the contracts are signed. She smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I heard through the grapevine that you might be making some changes. Veronica mentioned you could use some discreet help. I have 3 buyers who've been looking in your neighborhood, cash offers, quick closings. When can I see the property?" "Today," I said. "Ethan plays golf every Thursday afternoon. Come by at 2. Vanessa arrived exactly at 2, along with a photographer and a staging consultant. They moved through my house efficiently and professionally, taking notes and pictures. I watched them evaluate the home I'd chosen so carefully, the place where I'd thought I'd build a life. Now, it was just another asset to be liquidated. "You've maintained it beautifully," Vanessa said as we stood in the master bedroom. "The renovations you did last year really elevated the value. I'm confident we can get 2.6 million, maybe 2.7. The market is strong right now. How fast can you move?" I asked. "I'll have the listings ready by tomorrow, but I'm going to start with my private client list. No public listing unless necessary. I should have offers by the weekend." She was right. By Saturday morning, I had 3 offers, 2 at 2.6 million, 1 at 2.7, all cash, all willing to close in 2 weeks. I accepted the highest offer and signed the contracts in Vanessa's office that afternoon, while Ethan thought I was at a property inspection. When I got home, he was in the living room with Sylvia. They looked up when I walked in, and something in their expressions made me pause. They'd been talking about something serious, and I'd interrupted. "Savannah," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "How lovely to see you. I was just telling Ethan that we should all have dinner together next week. A proper family meal." "That sounds nice," I said, wondering what they were really planning. Sylvia had never suggested a family dinner before. She usually preferred I didn't exist. "I'll cook," Sylvia continued. "My house next Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. You will come, won't you?" There was something challenging in her tone, like she expected me to refuse, like she wanted me to refuse so she could hold it against me later. "Of course," I said. "I'll be there." After Sylvia left, Ethan was quieter than usual. He kept glancing at me with an odd expression, like he was trying to figure something out. That night in bed, he rolled over and put his arm around me, something he rarely did anymore. "You seem different lately," he said. "More confident or something. What's going on?" My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Just excited about the business expansion. It's a big opportunity." "Yeah, about that," he said. "I was thinking maybe I should get more involved. I mean, it's been a while since I worked, and I know the business pretty well now. Maybe I could take on a real role, not just as your husband, but as a partner." There it was. He was getting nervous. Something had spooked him, made him want to secure his position more firmly. I wondered if Tyler had said something, or if Sylvia had planted the idea. Either way, he was trying to get his name attached to my business before the prenup expired. "That's sweet," I said, turning to face him in the darkness. "But you know, the company's structure is pretty set. All the partnerships are formalized. It would be complicated to add someone new. Even you." "But I'm your husband," he said, and I could hear the edge in his voice. "That should count for something." "It does count," I lied. "It counts for everything, but business is business. You understand that, right?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he finally said. "I guess I do." But I could feel the tension in his body, the suspicion starting to grow. I'd have to move faster than I'd planned. The next week was a blur of activity. I signed the final closing documents on the house on Tuesday. The new owners wanted possession in 10 days, which meant I had to pack and find somewhere to go. I told Ethan the company had purchased a temporary corporate apartment downtown for me to use during the expansion project, that it made more sense than driving back and forth every day. "What about me?" he asked, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "The apartment is tiny, just a studio," I said. "You can stay here until I figure out our permanent situation. It's only temporary." He didn't like it. But what could he say? I was supposedly working around the clock on a major business project. It made logical sense. He had no idea the house had been sold out from under him. I started moving my personal items out gradually: clothes, jewelry, important documents, family photos. I was careful not to take everything at once, just enough that it wouldn't be obvious. I moved it all to a storage unit first, then, gradually, to the furnished apartment I'd actually rented. a beautiful two-bedroom place in a secure building downtown with a view of the river. Ezra continued his surveillance. Ethan was getting more desperate, his gambling worse. He'd lost another $30,000 in the past 2 weeks alone. He was borrowing from Sylvia now. I discovered she'd given him $50,000 just 3 days ago, probably expecting to get it back when he divorced me and got his settlement. On Saturday evening, I drove to Sylvia's house for the family dinner she'd arranged. It was a large, old colonial in the expensive part of town, inherited from her late husband. Ethan had grown up here, in this cold, formal house filled with antiques and judgment. Sylvia answered the door wearing pearls and a tight smile. "Savannah, you made it. Come in. Come in." The dining room was set for 4. Ethan was already there, along with Tyler and his wife Bethany. I hadn't realized they'd be joining us. Bethany was a quiet woman who always seemed slightly terrified of Sylvia. I felt sorry for her. We sat down to roast beef and potatoes, and Sylvia immediately began her usual routine of subtle insults disguised as concern. "Savannah, dear, have you been to the gym lately? You look a bit tired," she said, passing me the vegetables while taking the smallest portion for herself. "I've been busy with work," I said pleasantly. Of course. Your little business projects. How nice that you have something to occupy your time." She said it like I ran a hobby shop instead of a multi-million-dollar company. Tyler jumped in. "Actually, Mom, Savannah's company is doing really well. Ethan was telling me about some big expansion she's planning." Sylvia's smile tightened. "Yes, Ethan mentioned something about that. It seems like a lot of risk, though. Wouldn't it be wiser to focus on stability at your age? You're not getting any younger." I was 34 years old. She made it sound like I was ancient. "Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to grow," I said. "That's how I built the business in the first place." "Well, thank goodness you have Ethan to keep you grounded," Sylvia said, reaching over to pat her son's hand. "He's always been so sensible about money. Haven't you, darling?" Ethan smiled at his mother, and I saw the same coldness in his eyes that I'd heard in his voice that night outside the bedroom. This was what he'd learned from her, this casual cruelty, this belief that some people simply mattered more than others. Dinner continued with more of the same. Sylvia made comments about my appearance, my age, my business decisions. Tyler and Bethany stayed mostly quiet, and Ethan played the devoted son, agreeing with everything his mother said. I smiled and nodded and played my role perfectly. After dinner, Sylvia suggested the men go to the study for brandy while we women cleaned up. It was so old-fashioned and ridiculous that I almost laughed, but I followed her and Bethany into the kitchen. "I'm glad we have this time alone," Sylvia said as she handed me a dish to dry. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." "What's that?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "Ethan," she said simply. "He's been looking unhappy lately. I think the marriage is taking a toll on him." Bethany shot me an apologetic look, but said nothing. She'd learned long ago not to cross Sylvia. "I haven't noticed him being unhappy," I said carefully. "Well, you wouldn't, would you?" Sylvia said, her voice sharpening. "You're so focused on your work, your money, your properties. When was the last time you really looked at your husband and thought about what he needs?" I set down the dish I was drying and turned to face her fully. "What exactly are you saying, Sylvia?" She met my eyes with absolute confidence. "I'm saying that perhaps it would be kinder for everyone if you acknowledge that this marriage isn't working. Ethan deserves to be with someone who appreciates him, who puts him first, and you. Well, you clearly prefer your business to any relationship. Maybe it's time to part ways amicably before anyone gets hurt." There it was. She was preparing the narrative. When Ethan filed for divorce after the prenup expired, they'd claim I'd been a neglectful wife, that I'd pushed him away with my obsession with work. They'd paint him as the victim and me as the cold, selfish woman who deserved to be left. That's an interesting perspective, I said quietly. But I'm not planning to divorce Ethan. I love my husband. Sylvia's expression flickered with something like anger before she smoothed it away. Of course you do, dear. I just think you should be realistic about the situation. Ethan has his whole life ahead of him. He shouldn't be tied down by someone who can't give him what he needs. I knew what she meant. Children. Ethan had mentioned wanting kids early in our marriage, but I'd said I wanted to wait until the business was more stable. The truth was, I'd never been sure I wanted children, and I'd been honest about that. Now Sylvia was using it as another weapon, another proof that I wasn't good enough for her son. Well, thank you for your concern, I said, my voice still pleasant. But Ethan and I will work things out on our own. We finished cleaning up in silence. When we returned to the study, Ethan and Tyler were laughing about something, and I saw the way Ethan's face changed when he saw me. The laughter died, replaced by that polite mask he always wore around me. On the drive home, he was quiet. I was quiet too, thinking about Sylvia's words, about the trap they'd built so carefully. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I had no idea what was coming. My mother means well, Ethan finally said as we pulled into the driveway. She just worries about me. I know ahead. And I did. I knew exactly how much Sylvia loved her son, enough to help him plan to destroy someone else's life for money. That night, I lay awake long after Ethan fell asleep. My phone buzzed with a message from Ezra. He'd discovered something new, something important. I read his text 3 times, feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Ethan's gambling debts weren't just personal anymore. He'd taken out loans using my properties as collateral, not the real properties, but forgeries. He'd created fake documents showing that I'd agreed to secure his debts with my real estate holdings. The loans totaled over $300,000, and the loan sharks were starting to press for payment. If those fake documents ever surfaced in a divorce, even if they were proven fraudulent, the legal battle would be expensive and complicated. Ethan would claim he thought he had my permission, that we'd discussed it and I'd forgotten. He'd muddy the waters enough to drag out the proceedings, maybe force a settlement just to make it all go away. It was brilliant in a sick sort of way. He'd created leverage, insurance to make sure he got paid, even if I tried to fight the divorce. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd committed fraud, real, documentable, prosecutable fraud. And I had proof. I took a screenshot of Ezra's message and saved it to my encrypted drive. Then I sent a text to Judith in Chicago. We need to talk tomorrow morning. Emergency. When I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, I dreamed of clear water and open sky. I dreamed of freedom. The next morning was Sunday. Ethan slept late while I made coffee and sat in the kitchen waiting for Judith to call me back. She phoned at 8, sounding concerned. What happened? She asked. I told her about the fraudulent loan documents. I could hear her typing rapidly as I spoke. This changes things, she said. This is criminal fraud. We can use this. How? I asked. We can file a police report, but more importantly, we can use it to void any claims he might make in a divorce. If he comes after you for anything, we threaten to prosecute. He'll walk away with nothing to avoid jail time. I want more than that, I said. I want him to understand what he did. I want consequences that actually matter. There was a pause. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I'm done playing nice, I said. I'm thinking it's time to end this. The house closing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 a.m. I told Ethan I had a full day of meetings, kissing him goodbye like I always did, watching him settle back into bed with his phone. He had no idea that in 3 hours, everything would change. I met Vanessa at the title company office downtown. The buyers were a young couple who'd made their money in tech, eager and pleasant. They smiled as we signed, document after document, transferring my beautiful house to them. 2.7 million moved into my account, then immediately transferred to the trust Judith had established. The whole process took 45 minutes. Congratulations, the title agent said, shaking my hand. When will you be moving out? I already have, I said. The property is vacant as of this morning. That was mostly true. I removed the last of my personal items yesterday while Ethan was at his brother's office. The furniture would stay. That was part of the deal, but everything that mattered to me was already gone. I drove to my new apartment and changed into comfortable clothes. Then I sat down at my laptop and began the final phase. First, I emailed Ethan's phone. The message was simple. The house has been sold. The closing was this morning. You need to be out by 5 p.m. today. The new owners take possession tomorrow. Then I sent a second email with attachments. Photos from Ezra's investigation, Ethan with Kelsey, Ethan at the casino, Ethan meeting with loan sharks, and finally, copies of the fraudulent loan documents he'd created using my properties as collateral. The last email was the longest. I'd written it carefully over the past week, revising it until every word was perfect. Ethan, I know everything. I know about Kelsey. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the fake documents. I know what you said to your mother about me, about how disgusting you find me, about how you're only interested in my fortune. I heard you that night 3 weeks ago. I heard every word. For 3 years, I believed in us. I changed myself trying to be enough for you. I accepted your mother's cruelty because I thought that's what family meant. I supported your dreams, your choices, your complete lack of ambition because I thought I loved you. But it was all a lie. You married me for money. You waited for the prenup to expire so you could divorce me and take half of everything I built. You lied to Kelsey, to me, to everyone. You stole from me. You committed fraud using my name. Here's what's going to happen now. The house is sold. The money is in a trust you can't touch. My business has been restructured in ways that protect it completely. Every asset I own is secure. You get nothing because you contributed nothing. Your debts are your problem. Your lies are your problem. Your fraudulent loan documents are your problem. And if you try to use them in any legal action against me, I will have you arrested for fraud. I have proof of everything. I have recordings, photos, documents. I have witnesses. You can file for divorce whenever you want. I don't care about the prenup anymore because there's nothing for you to take. But if you or your mother or your brother try to cause problems for me, try to damage my reputation or my business, I will destroy you. I will press charges. I will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. You wanted to play games with someone's life. Congratulations, you lost. Don't contact me again. My lawyer will send you the divorce papers. Savannah. I hit send on all 3 emails and then blocked his number. Then I blocked Sylvia's number. Then Tyler's. I blocked them on social media, on every platform I could think of. I erased them from my life as completely as if they'd never existed. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. Even though I'd blocked him, he was calling from Tyler's phone. I declined the call. He called again and again. I turned off my phone. I sat in my quiet apartment and felt nothing but relief. It was done. 3 weeks from the night I'd heard those words outside my bedroom door, and it was completely finished. Ezra called my work line an hour later. He's at the house, he said. He's freaking out. The new owners just showed up with their contractor to start planning renovations, and Ethan's trying to explain that there's been some mistake. The police are there now. Good, I said. Let me know if anything else happens. Savannah, Ezra said, his voice gentle. You did the right thing. I've been doing this job for 30 years and I've seen a lot of bad people. What he did to you, what he planned to do, it was calculated and cruel. You protected yourself. That's all this is. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. I spent the rest of the day working. I had conference calls with contractors, reviewed blueprints for the new downtown development, met with Veronica to discuss project timelines. The work was grounding, familiar. It reminded me who I was beneath all the hurt. That evening, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. It was from Sylvia. You vindictive, selfish woman. How dare you throw my son out with no warning? How dare you destroy his life over some misunderstanding? Ethan loves you. He's always loved you. You're just too bitter and insecure to see it. You'll regret this. You'll spend the rest of your life alone, and you'll deserve it. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Judith with a note for the file. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the river. Louisville looked beautiful from up here, clean, bright, and full of possibility. The divorce papers were filed on Monday. Judith had worked over the weekend to prepare everything, and they were airtight. The prenup was still in effect for another 7 months, which meant all my premarital assets remained mine. The business restructuring was complete, removing any ambiguity about my company. The house sale was documented and legal. There was nothing for Ethan to claim and nothing for him to fight. His lawyer called Judith on Tuesday. I was in a meeting when she texted me. They want to negotiate. I texted back, there's nothing to negotiate. He gets 0. On Wednesday, Ezra sent me his final report. Ethan had moved in with Tyler and Bethany. He was still calling my office, leaving desperate voicemails that my assistant was instructed to delete without listening. He tried to get a loan to pay off his gambling debts, using his mother's house as collateral, but Sylvia had refused. The loan sharks were circling, and he had no way to pay. Kelsey had found out about me. Someone had sent her newspaper articles about my company along with wedding photos. She'd confronted Ethan at Tyler's house, screaming at him in the driveway while the neighbors watched. Then she'd posted about it on social media, calling him a liar and a fraud. The post had gone viral in local circles, shared and commented on by hundreds of people. Sylvia had tried to do damage control, calling mutual acquaintances to spread her version of events. I was the crazy, jealous wife who'd snapped and thrown out her innocent husband. I was vindictive and cruel. Ethan was the victim. But the story didn't stick. Too many people knew me, knew my reputation for integrity and fairness. And too many people had seen Ethan for what he really was, a charming man with no substance who'd married up and gotten lazy. Veronica called me Thursday afternoon. Have you seen the Tribune business section today? No. Why? There's an article about your downtown development project. It's really positive. They interviewed several city council members who praised your company's community involvement and ethical practices. There's a quote from the mayor calling you one of Louisville's most valuable business leaders. I pulled up the article on my computer. It was everything Veronica had said, plus a sidebar about my company's growth over the past 10 years. There was a photo of me at a construction site, wearing a hard hat and pointing at blueprints. I looked confident, capable, nothing like the woman who'd stood in her hallway 3 weeks ago, listening to her husband call her a fat hippo. Did you arrange this? I asked Veronica. I may have mentioned to a reporter friend that you were doing something innovative in urban development, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The rest wrote itself. You're genuinely impressive, Savannah. It's about time people were reminded of that. That evening, I met my lawyer at her Louisville office to sign the final divorce documents. Everything was ready to be served to Ethan. The marriage would be dissolved in 6 months, the standard waiting period. He would receive nothing, no money, no property, no ongoing support. After 3 years of marriage, he would walk away exactly as he'd come in, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the debts he'd accumulated. He signed the acknowledgement, Judith said, sliding a document across her desk. His lawyer advised him to just accept the terms rather than fight. I think they realized how bad the fraud charges would look if this went to court. I looked at Ethan's signature. I scroll across the bottom of the page. What about Sylvia? Has she tried anything else? A few more emails, some phone calls to the office, nothing actionable. She's angry, but she's smart enough to know there's nothing she can do. Her son lied to her too. Remember, she gave him $50,000 based on his promises about the divorce settlement. Now, she's out that money with no way to recoup it. Good. I know I should have felt guilty about that, about Sylvia losing her money, but I didn't. She'd raised a son who saw people as resources to be exploited. She'd encouraged his cruelty, laughed at his jokes about my appearance, helped him plan to take everything I'd worked for. She'd earned every consequence that came her way. I signed the final documents and stood up to leave. Judith walked me to the elevator. You handled this perfectly, she said. A lot of people in your situation would have stayed, would have talked themselves into believing it wasn't that bad, or they would have reacted emotionally, done something rash. You were strategic and patient. You protected yourself and your assets completely. I learned from the best, I said. Thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting me. And Savannah, she added softly, I know this has been terrible, but you're going to be fine, better than fine. You're going to thrive. I believed her. For the first time in 3 years, I actually believed I was going to be okay. 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop in downtown Louisville with Veronica, reviewing plans for our next project. The downtown development was ahead of schedule and under budget. The city council had approved our proposal for a second phase. My company had grown by 30% and I'd hired 10 new employees. Have you heard anything about Ethan? Veronica asked, sipping her latte. Ezra sent me an update last month, I said. He declared bankruptcy, lost everything. He's working at a car dealership now, living in a studio apartment on the east side. Sylvia won't speak to him. Apparently, she blamed him for losing her $50,000 and the gambling debts. He's on a payment plan. It'll take him years to clear them. Tyler fired him from the insurance agency after the Kelsey incident went viral. His reputation is pretty much destroyed. Veronica was quiet for a moment. Do you ever feel bad about it? About how completely you dismantled his life? I thought about that question. I'd asked it myself many times over the past months. The answer was always the same. No, I said. He tried to do the same thing to me. The only difference is I was smarter and faster. If I'd waited, if I'd trusted him even a few more months, I would have lost everything. He would have divorced me right after the prenup expired, taken half of what I'd built, and walked away feeling like he'd earned it. He would have destroyed me without a second thought. Fair enough, Veronica said. You know what I think? I think you're a woman who knows her worth now. That's worth more than any revenge. She was right. The past 6 months had been difficult, but they'd also been clarifying. I'd started therapy to work through the betrayal and the years of accepting Sylvia's cruelty. I joined a gym, not to lose weight, but because I wanted to feel strong. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. I'd remembered who I was before Ethan, before I'd shrunk myself trying to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. My business was thriving. My reputation in Louisville had never been better. I'd been invited to speak at a Women in Business conference next month. I'd been asked to join 2 nonprofit boards. I was building the life I'd always wanted, the one I put on hold, trying to be someone's wife. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks later. I didn't attend the hearing. Judith represented me, and the judge signed the dissolution papers without comment. I was single again, free and clear, with everything I'd built still intact. I celebrated by doing absolutely nothing. I stayed home, ordered takeout, and watched old movies in my comfortable apartment. It was quiet and peaceful, and I realized that this was enough. I didn't need someone else to make me complete. I never had. Ezra sent me a final update on Ethan a month after the divorce was finalized. He'd moved to another city, somewhere in Indiana, trying to start over where people didn't know his story. Sylvia had sold her house and moved to Florida to live near Tyler and Bethany. The family had fractured completely, each of them blaming the others for how badly their plan had failed. Kelsey had moved on too, dating someone new and posting happy photos on social media. I'd felt sorry for her initially, but she'd recovered quickly. She was 26 and resilient. She'd be fine. As for me, I was more than fine. I'd taken everything that was meant to destroy me and turned it into fuel. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I'd learned that I didn't need someone else's approval or love to be valuable. I'd learned that revenge, real revenge, wasn't about hurting someone. It was about protecting yourself and refusing to be a victim. One evening in late summer, I stood on my apartment balcony watching the sunset paint the river gold and orange. My phone buzzed with an email from my accountant. The trust I'd established had grown by 15% through careful investments. My net worth had increased by almost $2 million since the divorce. Everything Ethan had tried to steal, everything he'd planned and schemed for, I'd kept and multiplied. I thought about that night outside my bedroom, hearing those cruel words. That fat hippo disgusts me. I'm only interested in her fortune. At the time, those words had nearly destroyed me. Now they just seemed pathetic. He'd been so confident, so certain that I was too stupid and desperate to realize what he was doing. He'd been wrong about everything, about my intelligence, about my strength, about my worth. He'd underestimated me completely, and it had cost him everything. I raised my glass of wine to the sunset, to the river, to the city that had watched me rebuild myself. I'd survived betrayal, humiliation, and 3 years of emotional abuse disguised as marriage. I'd come through it stronger, wiser, and completely free. Ethan spent the next 2 years struggling to rebuild even a fraction of what he'd lost. The bankruptcy followed him everywhere, making it impossible to get credit or find decent employment. His gambling addiction, untreated and enabled for so long by his expectations of easy money, only worsened under stress. He bounced from job to job, city to city, always one step ahead of his debts and his reputation. Sylvia, bitter about her lost investment and humiliated by her son's public failure, cut him off completely, refusing even to take his calls. Tyler and Bethany distanced themselves too, tired of being associated with the scandal. Ethan ended up exactly where he'd always feared, alone, broke, and irrelevant. Living proof that trying to steal someone's life only guarantees you lose your own. As for me, I built something real, not just a business, but a life that belonged entirely to me, free from manipulation and cruelty. I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely yourself that the people who tried to diminish you become irrelevant. I looked back on that night in the hallway, on the woman I'd been, who'd stood there listening to those hateful words, and I was grateful to her. She'd been strong enough to stay silent, smart enough to plan, and brave enough to walk away from everything familiar to protect what mattered. That version of me had saved us both.